You're listening to the YWAM Nashville podcast. My name's Cody.
My name is Michael, and we'll be your hosts for this season. Welcome to episode 11, right?
Yep, episode 11.
I feel like it's been a long time since I've said such a thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why I have that feeling, but...
Michael and his wife, Alina, left last week for some vacation time. And so, like you heard in the last episode, if you're listening to these chronologically, we just did two of them, like, consecutively, like, one after the other. And then we've been gone, like, 2 weeks without doing one, so...
Yep.
It's been a while.
Here we are. And
yep.
I didn't even say that in the last one.
Yeah.
So, it's craziness. But yep, it's been a busy time around here, and we can talk about all the happenings later. But here we are, episode 11. We're pretty stoked about this. Today, our guest is us and the Holy Spirit, hopefully.
Yeah, so we were praying about it. We didn't get a word from the Lord on any specific person to have. We kind of thought maybe there were a few people that we could invite, but in the end, we were feeling like we had a lot to say on this topic, and the reason he didn't tell us anyone was because he just wanted us to do it on our own and to stop being stubborn and prideful and saying that we need to have someone else.
Yeah.
At least for this specific episode. So we just had a lot to say, and we felt like having someone else here anyways, after having so much difficulty trying to figure out, would just be like, hey, can you come and sit in while we talk? You know, like,
yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah, and I think we were, we like having people on, and we like, I don't know, I guess we like having, other personalities to kind of come in.
It's a lot more fun having an extra person.
Yeah, and so I think we were reluctant to go after it and do another episode with just us, but we felt like that's what the Lord was highlighting, and we've been talking about the things, and I'm actually really excited about it.
Yeah,
now.
This is a topic that both of us talk about with our friends and just between us.
Yeah.
Almost daily.
Pretty much always.
So this has been an episode long in the making, and we're excited to present to you Kingdom Culture, part 1 of a 2-part series on culture, I guess. I don't know. We're gonna talk about Kingdom Culture this week, and then also today, but won't come out for another week. We're gonna record part 2, which will be on American culture and how that's different from Kingdom Culture. And it's going to be challenging because there's a lot of polarized issues wrapped up in our culture, which we'll get to when we talk about our culture. But this week, we're just going to talk about Jesus and what it would look like if he was king here, physically, right now, like he's going to be for 1,000 years, according to the Bible. I don't know what that even means, but it says it's going to happen. So, yeah. Anyways, what does that look like? But before we jump into that, did you know I have a friend who has no body and no nose?
I did not.
Do you know what we call him?
What do you call him?
Nobody knows.
Oh, snap.
There it is. Gotcha.
There it is.
Sneak attack.
Oh. Just get him with the 1-2.
Yeah.
Gotta watch out for those. Where it starts off all conversational. It's not like, what do you get, when it's like, just like flows into it.
Yeah. I call that Brent style.
Yeah. You're like, is this okay? It's a joke, I guess. No.
Yeah.
Oh man, you gotta watch out for that like little side smile he does.
Yeah.
He's like, oh man, there it is.
Kind of like Cardi B's sister, who's an athletic trainer.
Yeah.
Cardio.
Oh, golly gee.
Got you again.
Snap. 2-0.
All righty. So, thinking about current events.
Psych.
What?
We switched it around. So.
Oh, psych. Yeah. So, thinking about current events, we decided that the term current events wasn't even actually accurate to what we had in mind originally.
Yeah.
So we've decided to change that whole segment to now be prayer points.
Prayer points.
Because it's not actually current most of the time. It's usually like a week ago or more current, you know? So
Yeah.
like the world's ending and we just don't say anything about it in that week's podcast because we recorded a week before.
Yeah.
So
Or the
we just
day
don't want to have
before.
any of those scenarios. And also, it's not like we're actually doing news. We're just like kind of highlighting significant things that could be prayed for that happen here that we hear about. So we thought maybe prayer points would be a better title and
Yeah.
also like remind you to pray for the things.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to just be like, well, this sucks and that's it. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, this terrible thing's happening. Like Nigerian Christians are being persecuted. Like we should pray for them. That kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Which that is a thing.
That is a thing.
It is happening.
Yes.
But exactly, it's like prayer points. And a lot of times they'll be like relevant to
Yeah.
larger things that are going on, but we're not
Don't
like
even.
we're not sharing news. Like that's not
Yeah.
necessarily the point.
Yeah.
So,
And if I would say anything about that, I would say don't pray that the persecution would end, but that the church would grow so much under the persecution that it would change the nation to the point at which persecution isn't an issue anymore. You know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah.
Like the Acts church, which is the reason that we're even here talking about this right now.
Yep. It seems like the church actually tends to thrive under persecution, which is a really interesting
We could use a little more of that
is an
here
interesting
in the
thing.
States. Actually, I feel like we've had to struggle with a lot as a church body here in the States recently, a lot more than usual. Like, we can't just go to church and then go home anymore. Like, you have to do community or don't do church, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't know. Well, I guess you could just watch it from home, but I don't know. There's a little more engagement happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it tends to just do with like the fact that we tend to like comfort, which we're actually going to talk about all these kind of things,
Next
but
episode.
we tend to like and prefer comfort, and those things lead to complacency within that and a lack of intentionality. It's like I go
Uh-huh.
to church or something and participate in these things because I have to, versus like Jesus is worthy of me risking everything to like connect with the body and to worship him and to read the Bible and to do whatever. And so it like has a lot more value in of
Yeah.
itself.
It's not that we want persecution.
Yeah.
It's that we want the engagement with God that comes from discomfort.
Yeah.
And yeah, he doesn't go out of his way to keep us away from things that are uncomfortable because he knows that we can grow through that. Like in general. But anyways,
In fact, he promises
there will be
a
trouble.
lack of comfort and
But
persecution.
take heart. I have
So-
overcome the world.
Exactly. So pray for
All right.
all the things.
For Nigeria and for us,
Yeah.
our country, our church.
Count it all joy.
Amen.
All right.
So, today we're going to be talking about the culture of the kingdom of heaven. So if Jesus was our actual physical governmental monarch, what would that look like? What kind of culture would that cultivate? What kinds of values would we have as a society? And the reason that these things are worth talking about is because we are not simply citizens of whatever country we live in anymore. Like, if you've moved into the kingdom of heaven, you are now a citizen of heaven,
Yeah.
living on earth.
Yeah.
So, as much as I live in the United States, my loyalty is first to heaven and first to my citizenship there. And I just live here.
Yep.
So, we need to know what the culture is and what the culture is, basically, of the country that we are becoming citizens of, you know? Like, when
True
people
that.
want to get a citizenship here in the States, they have to learn about our culture and our history and the way our government works. Basically what we're going to be doing for kingdom culture. So, where are we starting off at here, Michael?
Well,
there's so much.
Yeah. I think also just noting that, like, this is not any kind of exhaustive list. And just, I don't know, all the disclaimers, basically. This is not an exhaustive list. There are more things. This is not, like, the depth of even these handful of things that we talk about.
Yeah.
And this is not, like, the 100%, like, this is
the definitive definition.
Yeah. And so this is just things that we see and we've noticed. And yeah, us just kind of seeing how that lays out practically.
Yeah,
So.
and you can look at the Bible and the values of Jesus for yourself and be like you do have the authority to read scriptures yourself and make decisions about what the kingdom culture looks like. We just want to kind of highlight some areas we see where the kingdom culture doesn't look like Earth's culture, and like bringing a spotlight to those things.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, culture is such a huge topic. Like, we tried to look up culture and just like get an idea of what we're going to be talking about, and it was like everything
so
that people think and do and believe basically is what it boiled down to. And I'm like, I don't even know. But so it's like culture can be defined as it's like a collection of like people's underlying beliefs as a society. It's like, do you have a definition there that you want to read? You kind of making that face.
You were hitting a lot of it. I do have that one, but
all right. Well, okay. You can just clean up whatever I miss. But I was thinking, what I remember is culture was defined as like a group of people with shared underlying beliefs, values, kind of opinions about the way life works. It's like a lens for viewing reality that you don't even necessarily realize or can define. It's just part of your general society's like accepted views, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also defined as like the food, the art,
entertainment,
kind
of all
the
the things
history
that
of a specific people group. Basically, it's everything that defines one people group from the next people group.
Yeah.
So you even have so many different cultures within a country, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the borders that we draw around countries are defined by people, but then the groups of people within that are more defined by culture.
Yeah.
And I think that's even more important than nationality, is like ethnicity. Like this idea of like, I come from a certain group of people that believe this way, and so that's naturally how I'm going to view life, is through this lens of generally agreed upon principles and understandings from my group of people, and like our background, the kinds of traditions and, you know, things we have. So.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, like on a world scale, like our culture is quite a bit different than like Eastern Asian culture. Like they think differently, they have different values, there's different things that are important to them. Or within, like you're saying, even within America, you have different cultures on the coasts. You have like, I hear people refer to like Southern culture versus Northern culture. Like these, you know, lots of different things. And
like just compare California to Texas.
Yeah.
And
like
you got what
people are going to think
there.
different. They're going to have different values. And so, and then like their art will be different. Their food will be different. Like everything that plays out into basically will look a little different. And there's always like a blending of those things. It's never like, you can't super, you know, like lump people into that. It's more of a generalized like.
Which is also why it's so hard to define.
Yeah.
Because nobody has like a written down definition of this is my culture, you know? It's kind of just ingrained in your very being. Like, doesn't everybody think this way?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, no.
Man, oh man. So, culture, being kind of, the different like flavors of beliefs and things that we have. And so,
if there was ever a Neapolitan, it's America.
Yeah, and I think we'll kind of, in the next episode, we'll kind of dive into like American culture in particular. But this week we'll start with the kingdom culture.
Back to the kingdom.
and just what we see that the values and different flavors that things take are.
The upside down kingdom.
Aye.
The kingdom of God.
So I think starting off, we have to note the underlying philosophy. So philosophy being kind of, in a sense, related to culture, but kind of different in definition. So like philosophy would be like your like root underlying assumptions about life and everything. And it's like, it is literally the lens that you're viewing everything through. And then culture is like kind of the next layer out and like how that like plays out basically. So it's like philosophy would be like the roots of the tree, and the culture would be like kind of like the branches branching out from that.
Yeah. Like two different people groups can have the same philosophy, but different culture built on top of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and you see that like within even like the church, for instance, has different church communities have different cultures, even though they claim like, you know, to believe that Jesus is the center of everything.
Yeah.
Some have different emphases on this or that or the other thing. So
yeah. Which isn't bad, except where it differentiates, except where it
differs from.
My mom went to college. Yeah, but where it differs from the kingdom, which thankfully the kingdom of heaven is super easy to define the values of.
Yep.
Because it's literally written down.
Yeah.
Like the entire purpose of the Bible was Jesus is like, I want you to know what my values are and what you're stepping into when you agree to relationship with me and to operating under my authority. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what it looks like to be in my kingdom. So we literally have a written, like, this is the culture of heaven.
Yeah.
So
it's so good.
So what's the underlying philosophy then, would you say, of the kingdom of heaven?
Yeah, we were thinking about this, and I think we just came down to love.
Yeah.
Like,
wow, shocker.
Everything is because of the Lord's love. Like that, you have to start with that. And a lot of people, it would seem, don't start with that, and we can get into all that stuff later. But even within the church, like a lot of times that isn't the foundation, but the foundation is like that God loves us and cares for us, you know, and everything that looks like, which we can break down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we should probably define the kingdom of heaven as like, when we see Jesus talking about the kingdom of heaven, it's like this idea of being adopted into the family of God. Mm. And so the kingdom of heaven right now isn't a physical place, except like everywhere where a child of God is, where someone who is in obedience and under the lordship of Jesus Christ and in relationship with God, wherever they are is where the kingdom of heaven is. Yeah. It's like within the people of God. It's like if you've ever seen a movie where it's like their nation is destroyed, but they're like, our people will live on. And it's like, they're still that nation. They're just like, they don't have a country anymore. That's basically us. Yeah. We're like, you know, this will eventually be our country. Like everything that is will eventually be under the authority of Jesus. Mm-hmm. But while we're waiting for his full reign and his full dominion to come back, we are the kingdom of heaven. So when we talk about that, we're talking about the church, not the building, not the organization, but like the people and the ones who really have relationship with Jesus and are part of the church. Like they are the church, they are the kingdom. We're talking about kingdom culture. It means this is and should be the culture of people who identify as children of God. Yeah. So someday it will be a physical place. Right now it's just this kind of like an ideal that's carried within the hearts of people who identify with Jesus.
Yeah, on some level it's kind of hard to talk about all these things because they're like so deep and literally touch on everything. Yeah. But I did a study once on like what the kingdom of heaven was talking about when Jesus talked about it, and it was like basically what I found was it specifically refers to like the presence of God, like wherever the presence of God is, like is considered the kingdom of heaven. And so like you're saying, if he is in us and residing in us, mm-hmm. then he's there, and then these values are going to start taking shape, whether in us specifically or like around us as we go and interact with things. Like that's one thing I wanted to note about culture actually is that it kind of breeds itself. Like cultures like keep rebuilding themselves basically.
Yeah. Thankfully, our standard for culture never changes because God is always the same. So as much as like we kind of delineate in some of the ways that we come from that culture, the root of the culture stays the same. And I think we should also define kingdom since we've defined culture when we're talking about kingdom culture.
Yep.
Kingdom is king's domain, and it means everywhere where the king has authority.
Yep.
Like every physical space where the king is the ruler.
So good.
So if
So
God
if that's
has
you.
authority in your heart, you're part of his kingdom.
Come on.
The king's domain.
So I think if you were saying love is the roots of the tree, if that's the philosophy, the baseline for the culture, then what I would say would be the trunk, that's like the segue for that to come and exist and like take effect is relationship. And so we see that all throughout the Bible, like God is constantly searching for relationship, and Jesus came and was like talking all about how it's about relationship. And so you have this interesting moment with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Genesis where God like set it up in the sense of you can be with me and you cannot discern good and evil on your own, but you can be with me and I will teach you and I will show you and we can walk together and I'll in a sense disciple you in life, and that'll be your baseline for everything. But they chose a distance instead, and they chose to try to figure things out outside of that relationship and figure things out for themselves. And so, but yeah, so the heart of the Lord in everything is relationship. Like that love, that underlying philosophy of love, like plays out in his desiring relationship and everything coming through relationship, like salvation coming through relationship. And so, yeah.
So, kingdom being centered around love and God being love, didn't God like come here as a person and like set some kind of precedent for what perfect love looks like?
I think you might have.
Yeah. Do you remember what that looks like? Could you share with us a bit?
I mean, it looks like a whole bunch of things. So I think, again, and to touch on the last thing, if the trunk is relationship, like we see the Lord's heart constantly through how he relates to us. And he does that in a whole heck of a lot of ways, and basically defines what love looks like for us via how he relates to us. And so, I don't know. We just see that love isn't based on performance. It's not based on feelings. It's not based on, like, it's a very objective, like, God's like, you are mine and I made you. Like, we see this idea in Genesis of, like, I made you in my image. Like, like, that's where your inherent value is. Like, regardless of what you do, what it looks like, you are my son, And you see this with the prodigal son, too. Like, the son leaves, disowns the father, but the father's not like, well, you're not my son anymore. He's like, no, that's still my son. Like, he's out there
like,
doing
you
whatever.
hurt my feelings.
Yeah. And so we see this, like, really objective, like, God being like, no, this is what you are defined as, because he's literally the definition of reality. And so Jesus comes in and is basically showing us the heart of the Father, because he's like, basically, like, God is relating to us.
Yeah.
Yes, Jesus is the one we are referring to. But we see all throughout the Bible where God is, like, is relating to the people, and he's trying to get their attention, all this stuff. And at some point, it was like, all right, like, Jesus, a.k.a. me, God, going down.
He's coming. Let me give you just a metaphor for Jesus that was super, like, illuminating for me.
Yeah, dude.
At one point. So God is other than us, right? Like,
Yeah.
he's not like us. His thoughts are infinitely greater. He's uncreated. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. We can't even begin to grasp the concept of God. We have like these words for it that these words for him that don't really mean a lot if we don't already have this cultural interpretation of them. But so the way God crosses the gap and solves the problem of how do I communicate with people who aren't like me and are so infinitely narrow by comparison. And the way that God communicates to us, because he values communication and love is communication, is Jesus is the translation of like the love of God into humanity. Like if humanity is a language and like relating to us is important to him and he needs to figure out how to do that in a way that we can understand, like his translation of everything that he is and like his love, the way that he chose to do that was through this whole story from Genesis to Revelation. And like the translation of God into human terms is Jesus. Like he is the translation of love into humanity. So you can think about it that way.
Super deep.
Yeah.
I've literally never thought of it like that.
Yeah.
And so in Jesus, we see a ton of different things for what love looks like. We see that he is absolutely willing to confront complacency, apathy, and these different things. In love, and from a place of calling people higher, from a place of, like he said, he came not to condemn the world, but to save the world. And so there's this whole aspect, not only in his death, but in his life as well, where he's like calling people to life pretty much constantly.
Yeah.
And so there's a willingness to confront. There's a sacrificial aspect where you're like, where he's willing to give up himself. He's willing to step out of his perfect like relationship in the Trinity, come down and step into one of our bodies. So he probably got sick and probably had
crazy gas.
Yeah. Like who knows what goes through the things that we go through.
On.
Yeah. And then and then aside from that, like going through like torture and abandonment and all these different things. And so, yeah, we see this aspect of sacrifice. We see forgiveness in him talking about like turning the other cheek, and then actually exemplifying that to us by what he was doing. And even as people are doing just such horrific things to him, he's like, forgive them for they know not what they do, which is still baffling my mind.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And we see like a surrender to what the Father wants. He's like, not my will, but yours, And so there's all these different aspects that are just so like, love is giving yourself wholly and completely to the Father and what his, what he wants.
While we're talking about Jesus, though, what would you say? I have heard the argument given before, like, well, that's Jesus, though. Like, he was God. Like, you don't really expect me to live up to those standards, do you? Like, what would Jesus say to such things?
Well, basically, Jesus is constantly trying to be an example for us. Like, he's constantly looking at his disciples. And the whole time he's here, he's like, this is how it's done. This is what it should look like. This is what the kingdom of heaven is. He never once says like, I'm on a different plane than you.
Yeah.
Even for the like some of the hardest stuff of like suffering, we might be like, well, I'm not called to die like he was. And he was like, no, you got to pick up your cross and follow me. And he was like,
well, he says, die to yourself as well.
Yeah, and die to yourself and all these different things. And
or
so
maybe that was just Paul, but either way.
You take, well, no, he does too.
Oh, okay.
And so there's this whole just aspect of him like he never gives us an excuse to do anything else. And in fact, he's like, he talks about us like, and he brings in this whole discipleship thing, which is about us becoming like him and conforming to his image. And then you have like Paul, who's like, I'm crucified with Christ and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me, you know? And then you have in 1 Corinthians, it's like, I'm not my own any longer. I was bought at a price. Like, there's this whole aspect of like, it's not me, like it's Jesus. I'm called to the same standard as Jesus. Like Jesus set the standard of what life here is supposed to look like. And we, through the power of the Holy Spirit, are called to live that life and at that standard. And he works that into us. And so basically there's no excuse. You won't be able to find an excuse biblically, but you can find a
find-
whole lot of
Yeah.
stuff on the side
You can
that's
find
like,
plenty of times Jesus is like, this is how you should do it.
yeah,
But you don't ever find a point where he's like, this is only me. In fact, he says you will do greater things than these.
yeah, which is nuts.
And his disciples were killed in even more horrific, arguably, ways than he was.
Yeah.
Aside from maybe being betrayed by literally everyone. But,
Yeah.
you know.
So God's version of love is crazy and is so good. And yeah.
So backtrack just a sec. You didn't hear that part we just cut out, but got a little ahead of ourselves. We wanted to talk about, since we kind of just named a few of these values of Jesus, how those play out in the kingdom.
Yeah.
Like what that looks like in relation to other people within the kingdom and people who are not inside the kingdom. Like what that looks like in our culture. So first we'll start with like how willing Jesus is to confront people. Now, in American culture, we won't get into too much, but confrontation sounds like a bad thing, and it usually is, because people are like polarized, and it's like more like beating someone over the head and trying to get them to believe what you do than it is actually coming from love.
Yeah.
But confrontation, when done for the right reasons and in the right way, is actually a really loving thing to do. Like, if you know that someone is about to burn their hand on a hot stove, and you don't say anything, and they burn their hand, is that being loving? It's not. It just isn't. And so there's like a lot of ways, especially in dealing with like the Pharisees and other such hard-hearted people, where Jesus like finds the one thing that's keeping them from growing in him, and he's like challenges them there directly.
Mm-hmm.
And they either change or they walk away sad or frustrated or angry, but he's okay with that. He's like, I would rather challenge you and you walk away than miss this opportunity for you to grow as a person.
Yeah.
Like, he has a higher value for them as a person than he does even for his relationship with them.
Yeah.
Like, that's the extent of his love.
Come on.
So, loving confrontation is a value of the kingdom culture.
True that. True that.
You want to talk to us about what sacrifice looks like in the kingdom, Michael?
Yeah, so I think in the same way that Jesus gave himself, there's this idea of sacrifice for others, and you're putting more value in others and less in yourself. You're looking at like more objectively, like what can I give? And there's this whole aspect that is crazy to me, that God is constantly giving of himself. Like, we don't deserve it on any level, and he just constantly goes over and above, which is what grace is, and gives us far more than we ever deserve or anything. And so I think in the same way, like modeling that is something that just happens when the kingdom of heaven is there. Like, we're constantly sacrificing. One of my favorite stories, I forget entirely where it is. I want to say maybe Galatians. But it talks about people who, like, even in their poverty, like, they would give like crazily, in crazy ways, would give above and beyond what they even had.
I think that's Ephesians, maybe.
Maybe. I think he was talking about the Galatians.
Oh.
Like, I think it was the Ephesians, but he was talking about somebody else. And he was like,
Gotcha.
these people. But anyways, so there's this whole idea of like just giving of yourself for the sake of others, and that just being a value, which you might be like, why is that a value? And it's like, well, because God values that, and we should be darn grateful for it, because that's how he relates to us, and just out of his goodness. And so like, that just happens when you're in the kingdom culture, and you have that.
There was a couple times where the Pharisees were complaining because Jesus was breaking their rules, and he tells them something interesting. Like, on multiple occasions, he's like, one time he tells them, go and figure out what this means. In Matthew, I desire compassion and not sacrifice. And then later, they're complaining again, and he's like, but if you knew what this means, I desire compassion and not sacrifice, you would not accuse the innocent.
Yeah.
And I think what he's saying there, because there is sacrifice in love. So he's not saying he doesn't want sacrifice in and of itself. He's saying he doesn't want sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like, I think, I could be wrong because this is where I'm moving into my understanding, but I think compassion it's like mercy that's willing to do something. So there's like an aspect of I'm giving of myself. I'm sacrificing because I'm moved by your situation, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
So like the kind of sacrifice we're talking about is the kind that's motivated by compassion.
Yeah.
Like you see the situation that someone is in, and because you're so moved by love, you cannot help but move to assist that person, to bring them up, to lift them up. So that's the kind of sacrifice that comes from love, is not I'm being holy because I'm giving things up. It's I see your condition. It moves me. I want to do something about it.
Yeah. Come on. And there's such a like a caring thing. Like it's on the level of like somebody laying their life down for somebody else,
literally.
you know, which Jesus talks about. He's like,
Yeah.
greater love has no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. And so everybody thinks it's great. Like if, you know, a dad saves his child at the risk of himself and his own peril, or, you know, and those kind of things. And so it's that same kind of idea, but it actually in the kingdom not only applies to those that we love, but and to those that we're close to and to those relationships that benefit us, but it looks so far beyond that. Like Jesus is on the cross sacrificing himself and is caring about the people who are doing it to him, and even says forgive them, and goes through this whole thing knowing that most of these people probably won't ever think twice about this or be...
They will continue to hate him till
Yeah.
their dying breath.
And so, but he still comes knowing that, like he said, like many will search for the kingdom, but few will actually find it. And so he has this understanding, but he still puts himself out there. And so it's not in some way for the sense of reward. It's just for like, he's like, man, I'm so moved by you, like you said, and I like got to do anything I can to like get in here, you know?
Yeah. There's a grace for missing the target. Like, we're not saved by our works.
Yeah.
And he's paid the price for our weakness, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't aim for the target. Like, our standard of sacrifice and of love, if you think about your very worst enemy, the person who hates you the most, would you, if you knew that they would not survive or they would not make it to heaven unless you gave your entire life for them, would you do it? That is the standard that we are aiming for. I'm not saying we'll hit that mark, but that is what we should aim to achieve. So, and then there's forgiveness.
Oh, buddy.
Can you just repeat what you were telling me earlier about forgiveness?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times we use this word forgiveness and we talk about forgiveness, but in reality, we don't. In our day and age, and with the way that we often view God and the gospel, we kind of leave out our need for mercy. And so it's this interesting thing where we've kind of lost, I think, some of the power of it. But mercy literally looks like mercy being forgiveness and not getting what you deserve and it being wiped clean. And so there's this idea that you see all throughout Scripture where God's like, I will separate you from everything you've done because I do not define you by what you've done. Even though you might define yourself like that, I do not define you like that. And so there's this complete removal as if it never happened. Like to the extent that you have done absolutely the most unthinkable things. And God is there like, hey, just come be with me. Like, I will forgive and forget all of this if you just leave all of it behind and come and be with me. It doesn't mean you get to continue in that, but it means that you are stepping out of your relationship with the world that's unhealthy in this way, and you step into relationship with him. And so it's like, and we all need this, and this is such a key thing because Jesus talks about like, if you've broken a single one of the laws, then you've broken the whole law. And so you're as guilty as anybody else. So, and then Jesus also steps up this whole standard. Like, if you even lust after a woman, you've committed adultery. So thinking that that girl looks good in those tight jeans is the same as you cheating on your wife, or however that goes. Or you, like Jesus says, if you were even angry at your brother and you say that you're a fool and you're whatever, then you are guilty of hellfire and you've committed murder in your heart. So like you being angry at your brother is on the same level as like Hitler actually killing people. So you have this whole like standard that Jesus sets of like, he's looking at your heart, like what is in your heart. And a lot of times we like to throw that out and be like, well, it's about the heart. It's not about, but that's like a whole nother crazy standard. And the only way that you can get out of that is relationship and is stepping into the love. And so Jesus offers this, like, I can completely separate you from that thing and you can come and be mine. And so in the kingdom culture, those of us who are citizens of heaven, like Jesus says, those who have been forgiven much will forgive much, right? And so you have this whole idea of like, we should be forgiving as if it never happened. It has no bearing on how we treat you. We're not keeping you at an arm's length or anything like that, but it's like literally as if it never happened. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that being forgiveness, that being a kingdom value, that being something that Jesus constantly is representing to us. If you're actually in the kingdom and you understand how you've been forgiven, you understand that you are as guilty of hell as anybody else for your rebellion against him, then you should be willing to forgive.
What about if I know someone's heart hasn't changed and they're probably going to hurt me again? I should still keep them at arm's length, right? Like, they should stay away from me.
So 1 John has this interesting... 1 John is so good, by the way. Recommend reading it.
Mm-hmm.
But it talks about how God defines love, right?
Yeah.
And love includes X, Y, and Z. And even in 1 Corinthians 13, it talks about love, like keeping no record of wrongs and all this stuff. So God's standard is the standard of love, which includes forgiveness, like we're saying.
Uh-huh.
And so we have to have Jesus' definition of forgiveness in order to be loving. And 1 John says, if you do not love your brother, a.k.a. it does not look like how I have defined love, how I have shown you love, how I have related love to you, like, then you have not seen God. You have no part in him, which is super intense, right? And so we have to, one, start with our relationship and understanding how the Lord relates to us and loves us, and then that will translate to how we love people. Yeah. And so if you're holding somebody at arm's length, you have to recognize Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus, like I said a minute ago, comes in, is dying on the cross for people who will never care about him, and then even now continually pursues us to the extent that he gets hurt over and over and over again because we run back to the world and we run back to old and familiar things. We're like a dog returning to its vomit over and over and over and over again. And he still puts himself in that place. And that's kind of the whole story of, what's that prophet? Hosea?
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of like that whole deal. And we see God just constantly pursuing Israel in the Old Testament, even though they just keep running away from him and keep, in a sense, like, he's so jealous and it like breaks his heart, but he keeps putting himself in that position.
If you don't know, Hosea marries a prostitute named Gomer, and she keeps leaving him, and God keeps telling him to go back and marry her again.
Yeah.
And no, I know I have friends who have unhealthy relationships that they keep going back to. But the issue isn't forgiveness here. It's not forgiveness that's hurting them. It's a lack of connection with God.
Codependence.
And yeah, that's where codependence comes into play, is you're trying to find some other thing that's going to fulfill you other than God.
Yeah.
And you're opening yourself up for more damage there that isn't coming from a place of love and isn't showing love to the person that you're quote unquote forgiving. So that's not forgiveness. That's a lack of the love of God. Yeah. It's you. There's no condemnation in what I'm saying, but you need Jesus. That person is never going to fulfill you. You can't fully forgive them until you no longer need them, because when you don't need them anymore, then you'll realize how much forgiveness you need to give to them, because once you don't need them, you'll be frustrated by all the pain and damage that they've caused you, but you need to bring that to Jesus, and he'll show you how to forgive and how to move forward, and then you can love them from a healthy place.
Yeah.
Right? And then that's when change comes. Like, I couldn't find the story, but Michael was telling me he's heard a collection of different stories about girls who were raped and then felt led to
They
felt the Lord calling them to reach out to their abusers and to offer forgiveness and extend friendship. And through that, the love of the Father and the extent of the forgiveness of God towards people who hurt him and who reject him,
Yeah.
And so if there's even a chance that the most terrible person is going to find forgiveness and a relationship with God, because there's absolutely no reason that I should still love them, but I do, then I want that to happen. And that's a value of the kingdom of heaven, is I am in relationship with the Father. I understand the consequences. And I've prayed through this, and I really do feel like God is leading me in this scenario to move back into this relationship and show love and forgiveness. Then by all means, do that.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that that's the Lord's heart. Don't just go and do it because you think you can, or because we're saying that that's what God wants.
Yeah.
You need to come from a place of love first. You need to be secure in the Father, and you need to understand his forgiveness for you. Like, there's a lot that needs to happen in your heart. You should probably talk to a mature Christian friend and process with them before you do anything like that. But just staying out of harm's way for the sake of staying out of the harm's way is not Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's worth noting that, like, Jesus was solid in his identity as he came to do this. And like 100%. We said, like, he was okay with watching people walk away.
Yeah.
He was okay with, on some level, with, like, people rejecting him and people doing the things that they did to him, because he knew who he was.
Yeah.
Because he had this aspect of, like, the Father being like, this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. And that was the place he was operating from. Like,
he's sitting at his last supper with his disciples. He's like, here, Judas, have a piece of bread.
Yeah.
Go do what you need to do.
Yeah.
He's not like, throw this man in prison,
Yeah. Yeah, and he probably knew for a while that this was, like, in Judas's heart. And he still is, like, relating to him. And it's like, I'm sure he was, like, pouring all kinds of love out on him.
And you'll note he washes the disciples' feet before he dismisses Judas, doesn't he?
Yep.
So he washed Judas' feet.
That's crazy.
Just keep that in mind.
Man.
I'm not even saying
I'm getting
that I'm that's the point here. Yeah. I'm not saying that I'm the forgiveness guy. Like, I still have unforgiveness that I'm working through, because it's harder than it sounds when we're saying this in theory. Like, this is what we're aiming for. This isn't what we need to hit in order to be Christians. This is what we aspire to. This is the fullness of God that we're pursuing.
Yeah.
But
we are pursuing. And I think that's a big thing to note with all these things. You might be like, man, I don't love people very well or something.
Yeah.
But the point is not try harder to do the thing. Like, don't try harder to forgive. Like, instead, go be with Jesus and understand. Like that 1 John I was talking about, like, it starts with, like, it's not how we loved God, but how he loved us. And so everything has to flow, again, from his love, from the relationship, from intimacy with him in those things.
Oh, man. The whole point of this episode is this is the extent of God's love, and that's why it's our kingdom culture.
Yeah.
He's like our monarch, our deity. Everything that makes us a kingdom is what he is. And so you can't love people until you understand the love of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
So some things Jesus also says about forgiveness that I don't even know what to do with this, but he clearly uses the words forgiveness. so he must be talking about it. But if you want to like wrestle with these, maybe not make a weird theology out of it, but like just ask the Lord about it. But there's a point where he says, if you don't forgive anyone their sins, the Father will not forgive your sins.
Yep.
What does that even mean?
He's like, this is such a strong
This
value
is
of
such a
mine.
big deal.
Like, it starts like here.
And then the other verse I was thinking of is, whoever you forgive will be forgiven, and whoever you do not forgive will not be forgiven. How does that work?
Yeah, I have no idea.
You guys know what I'm talking about? Do you remember that verse?
Feel free to send us
man.
your theories. And
Yeah, please do. I don't want your theory unless you've prayed about it, but
Yeah.
I'm so curious about how that fits into my understanding of God. So again, we don't have all the answers, but we have all the questions.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Yeah.
It's the most true statement. I feel like we've said this one time.
So our
Yep.
last like topic that we had for Jesus, obviously you could talk about Jesus all day, but what we want to talk about surrender, because that's been a huge thing for both of us.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us about the general idea of surrender and how Jesus represents that?
Yeah, so not only does he talk about it, but something interesting that has been pointed out recently is that Jesus a few times actually seems to mention that his will was somehow slightly different than the Father's, which I think I don't even know how to wrap my brain around that. But like when he's praying in the garden, he's like, "Lord, if it's your will, like let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done." So he's basically, and a couple other times where it's pretty much that explicit.
Yeah.
He's like, "Hey, this isn't my preference right now, but like whatever you want,
It's crazy.
Father." Which I do what you
can't
want
even
with
wrap
that.
my mind
I don't
around.
know.
We have this idea that Jesus is like, yes, of course, being murdered.
Yeah.
You know, that he's like 100% understands but there's like this idea that he had a will too.
Yeah.
And it was fully submitted to God.
And even when the disciples are like, he's like talking to the disciples about like the end coming and different things. And he's like, I don't even know when this date is. Like that's the Father knows, specifically like when he's like, it'll
Coming
come
back.
like a thief in the night and that
Yeah.
whole deal, I think. And he mentions that like, he doesn't even know this certain time that the Father's coming, like only the Father knows, which is just really interesting.
Yeah.
And do what you want with that. We're not trying to make any kind of crazy systems out of anything. But there's an aspect of Jesus surrendering his deity, surrendering himself to come down and align himself with the will of the Father. And then, so not only that representation, but he talks about it basically constantly. He's like, if anyone would come after me, deny himself, take up his cross, follow me. If anyone wants to save their life, they'll lose it. But anyone who loses their life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? So that whole idea is like surrender. And he constantly is talking about like, hey, rich young ruler guy, like you have to surrender this stuff that clearly means a lot to you because you go away sad.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you're doing everything else right, there's this one thing, and he basically is constantly relating to people like that. It's like, hey, surrender. Like you don't get to do your own thing. And that's pretty much the context of everything. The whole Bible, like I would say, comes down to just surrendering yourself to the intimacy.
If you got my most recent newsletter, I put that in there as well. It's not because I'm like, oh, you need to do better. I'm just like so moved by the level of surrender that God calls us to. Like, he who loses his life for my sake will find it.
Yeah.
Like, we don't even know what our life is or where it is until we lose it, is what he's saying. It's crazy. So I wanted to share a story with you about a recent experience with surrender. I've been walking through something the Lord's been teaching me. So I felt like...
Exactly.
I felt recently like the Lord was asking me to give up video games. So I was like, oh, okay, I can fast video games. And he's like, yeah, just go for a month. I was like, yeah, okay. So I went a month. And then at the end of the month, he was like, yeah, you should just go another month. And I was like, I mean, I guess so, because I don't really care. But so then it got to the end, almost the end of that. I didn't make it the whole month. I stopped like a week before the end of the month. But there's so much tied up in it. It would take a long time to explain. But basically, I like was homeschooled. I grew up. I would finish school as fast as I could and go play video games with my brothers. And like I related to these characters in the game. They were like, you know, almost friends in a weird sense of like my development or something. And like I get super nostalgic, and like the end of a video game was always so sad because it's like, oh, there's nothing more. Like my brain thought that I had these relationships that are now gone, so I would like suffer this grief and this loss every time I finished a video game. And like ones that I used to love, I'd go back to as an adult and be like, why isn't this satisfying? Like there's something here. I don't know. I'm trying to hold on to the past or something. But anyways, there's just a lot tied up in there where it's like it was causing me emotional pain that I did not realize. It was distracting me from God. It was blurring the love of the Father in my eyes. And I couldn't see that until he had me give it up a few different times. This last time for 2 months was the longest. And then after like a week or two of playing video games again and just feeling this really weird funk and like all kinds of messed up and not spending time with God, then I was trying to just put my life back together. And there's one night I was just laying on the driveway, our new driveway that was poured for us here at the base, and it's beautiful. And I was looking up at the sky and talking to him, and he was like, do you understand now? And I was like, yeah, I think I do. So that's also a testament to his patience. Like, he walked with me through that whole process, knowing the whole time that I needed to give this up, but being like, why don't you just trust me a little more? Okay, now how about a little more, you know? And then we got to this point, he's like, now do you understand, son? And I was like, I think I get it. So he was like, are you ready to just leave it by the wayside and come follow me? And I was like, I think so. I think I can do that.
Yeah.
So, and then I went like a week. I didn't play. And then I played again for a week. And it was just not a good experience. It was a great game until the end was like terrible and really depressing, and basically just brought up all the things I was suspecting of and like gave me more revelation of why it's not good for me. And so, yeah, basically I'm just done. And it's because he walked with me through that. He asked me to give it up, and I did it out of relationship, knowing that he has better for me, as hard as it was. So just ask him if there's something, you know, he's faithful to tell you if there's something that's standing between you. Just ask him, God, is there anything that's keeping me from understanding your love the way that I should? Is there anything that's between us? Anything I'm still holding on to that's keeping me from living in complete surrender like Jesus did? And if there is, it'll start to bother you, and he'll start talking to you about it like a friend or a father does. You know, a good father, he's like, hey, so I noticed this thing. You're thinking about it all the time. Yeah. Even during worship. Is it that big of a deal? And you can be like, no, what? No, it's just video games. It's fine. They're not bad. He's like, yeah, I know, but, you know, just saying. And then over time, it's like, okay, I'm ready to listen now, you know?
Yeah.
So, do you have anything else to say about surrender?
I mean, I have like the same thing in the same areas of video games and entertainment in different forms.
Oh, yeah, just fictional entertainment in general.
Yeah.
There's like these weird connections that happen for me that I didn't even realize. So I'm like talking to the Lord about that now, but that's why he's like, it's time for surrender, Cody.
Yep. Which it's always like we view it as a loss in a lot of ways.
It is a loss.
Like it is a loss, and our brain processes it as a loss in the first place.
Yeah.
But in the end, like, and what
it's
we'll find, it is a gain.
It's like Paul talking about his filthy rags by comparison to the fullness of God.
He's like, man, you got to be crucified to the world, and the world has to be crucified to you. And he talks about giving up the garbage that he's been holding on to. Like, it's garbage in comparison. Like, some level, like, you hold on to it and you get identity from it and all these things, and it's a loss.
It's like, who am I without it?
But like, yeah. And then it's hard, and you kind of go through the sense of like reinventing yourself, but it's so much better and so much like it's been holding you back this whole time.
Just Jesus.
And so
Nothing
it's got to
else.
be Jesus. Yeah.
There's your identity.
Yeah. And so
not skinny jeans, not makeup.
Yep.
Not tractors or trucks or working out or coffee, literally anything.
Yeah.
Just
music.
Jesus.
And yeah, we can even get like into these weird things, even when, like within church and stuff. A lot of times we get surrender from a lot of different things that aren't Jesus. And it's not that most of these things are inherently bad in and of themselves. I don't think Jesus thinks video games are evil in of themselves. I don't think Jesus thinks, coffee or working out or anything. But it's when it takes this place of you getting your identity from it, / it's withholding you, because it's like in Hebrews, it's either 11 or 12. I want to say it's 11.
I think 11 talks about all the here's the faith that went before us, and then 12
I think it is 12
is like, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us cast off every hindrance and every sin that so entangles us, and run with endurance the race set before us.
Set our eyes on the Lord, and then
fixing our eyes.
And so there's this idea of like fixing your eyes on the Lord and setting aside not only sin that so easily entangles us, but just everything that hinders us, And in 1 Corinthians, it says a couple times, like, you guys say that all things are permissible, but Paul basically responds with, but not all things are beneficial. So we're not going after permissible. We're going after beneficial.
We don't have time for permissible.
Yeah, exactly.
We literally do not have time. If you're over, 40 or 50, you know exactly what we're talking about, because you're the ones who keep telling me that. There's just not enough time.
Well, and that struck me one day. I worked at a cemetery for like a month once upon a time, and I was like weed eating around the grave sites and stuff, and I came across this kid who was literally born the same day I was, and might have been like in the hospital room next to ours or something. And it just hit me, this craziness of like, I'm not promised tomorrow, right? Like there's just such a lack of time. And I think we'll talk about this in the next episode, but we often assume that we have a lot of time and Yeah,
it's not a sad thing in the kingdom though.
Yeah, it's not.
Having less time is even better. Paul talks about, it would be better for me if I go, in reference to his death. Yeah. He says, but it is better for you if I stay.
Yeah.
So I'm okay with that, because I prefer you as my brothers over myself. Like, when we die, we're just moving on to an infinite kingdom of God. Like, literally, this isn't even comparable.
And surrender literally is the gospel. Like Adam and Eve chose their own thing rather than surrendering to what the Lord had for them. And so when Jesus comes, he's like, hey, you're trying to do it yourself. It stinks. Whether you're trying to follow the law or you're of the world, it just stinks.
Yeah.
And so surrender yourself to the dream that God has for you.
I would say surrender is like the exercise of humility. It's like,
that's good.
When you feel humility, you exercise it by moving in surrender. You're either submitting to preferring your brother. Why do I keep saying that? You're either preferring your brother, you're either submitting, or you're submitting to Jesus, but you are moving in surrender. You're letting go of your own desires and ideas.
But eventually your desires become for the Lord. Like
the more you die.
Yeah.
The more you die, the better.
The more you come to life, but actually.
the more you die in the flesh and you come alive in the spirit.
Come on.
Yeah, so I was also going to say, I don't think video games are bad in and of themselves, but I think it does make the Father sad. Like, I know that I was in bondage to it for so long, and it was causing me pain, as much fun as it was. And then I know I have so many friends and relatives that are still in bondage to it. And it's terrible because you don't think you are, because it's not a bad thing morally. It's just like if you knew that something was causing your kids pain, you probably wouldn't feel the greatest about it. Even though it's not a bad thing, it's just makes you sad,
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, it's probably not his favorite thing.
Yeah.
Like you could easily say that like people bond over video games, but people bond over marijuana. People bond over gang violence, Yeah. People bond over rioting and looting. It doesn't, like, that's not, you can find different ways to bond.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a bad thing in and of itself, but we're not looking for what's not bad. We're looking for what's good.
Yeah. For what's like objectively a positive.
Yeah. If we're living, if our bodies are in obedience to us, if we're operating in the fullness of the Spirit of God, then we should be able to direct our bodies at what we're aiming for and not just what feels good and natural, Which I'm preaching it myself. It
reminds me of watching drug shows with my family. Like we'd watch like Intervention and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And there was always this person, usually like, I don't know, like usually they have like their parents there and siblings and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so this child of this parents would be like into drugs and into hardcore stuff. They've like, in a sense, usually ruined their life to some extent.
Yeah,
but they've given up different things that they had going for them, and the parents are like super upset. They hate watching their kids literally choosing something that's poisoning them and is destroying their life. And so if the person chooses to like go through this whole thing and try to like get clean from drugs or alcohol or whatever, there's a loss. There's a sense of like your body wants this and you go through withdrawals. That's why you normally go be a part of a program and whatever. But on the outside of that, there's so much more life to have and happen, that it's like crazy. And from the outside, you can see that that's what's happening. And so that's like God looking at us like, you're choosing death and you think you want it and you keep going back to it and it's going to be hard for you to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But it's so much better. And basically nobody would argue that, that's objectively on the outside. And so it's a lot like that.
I would testify my life is, I'm still sad because I really like video games, but it's obvious that my life was better when I was fasting and is becoming better now that I'm surrendering this.
Yeah.
Like, I have more time for learning to speak Japanese. I have more time for playing guitar, learning to do that. I have more time for, like, spending with Jesus. Like, there's plenty of healthy, beneficial things or just hammocking. I enjoy that. That's restful. It's not, it's not crippling my soul.
Yeah.
So there's ways.
Like
life is enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think within all this, to kind of move on to the next point is...
Got my friends, Michael and Alina.
Oh, yeah. But to move on to the next point, like we're talking about getting identity out of things. And the next point we had is identity. And in the kingdom, your identity, as we mentioned earlier, is based on the Lord defining you. Like, again, he's the creator. He's the definition of reality. If I create a cup and I say this is for a flower pot, somebody else can come and say like, oh, this is for coffee, but it's not. Like, I created it. I defined it. Like, sure, you can misuse it, but I defined this as a flower pot. Gosh darn it. So you can put Kool-Aid in it. Yeah. So you can use
Game
it for
and
whatever.
Pottery Works. Sponsor. Not really.
But so it's out of what the Lord defines you as. And the only way you can know that, again, is to go back to relationship and to go back to this place of like sitting with the Lord and being like, man, what do you think of me? Like, everybody says this. Everyone says I'm defined by all these things. But like, Lord, what do you say? And it's in that place where you get to this place like we were talking earlier where you can forgive because you're like, oh, Lord Jesus, you love me. And you say I'm your son. And like that person called me an idiot or something. But like, it doesn't even matter because that's not what you say about me. So like it just bounces right off of me,
Yeah.
Is at least like what
I'm
we're working
rubber,
towards.
you're glue. I'm just kidding. We were talking about things that elementary school kids say earlier today.
Yeah.
Just reminiscing.
And so, yeah, like, just, I don't know, everything being based out of you being his. Like, God's like, I want to be your dad. Everything comes out of this place. Like, your identity is not literally anything else. It's not how much you read the Bible even. It's not you going to church. It's like you in the eyes of the Lord, which strips away everything else. And that's why he calls us out of these things, because we get identity from these things.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Everything that's not what he made you to be.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you love playing the guitar, and in talking to him in relationship, he's like, yeah, I made you to be good at the guitar. And like, that's part of the identity that I've given you. Hold on to that. Then like, you keep doing that. Like, but it's not the guitar in and of itself that is your identity. It's the fact that that's what God made you. You know, that's how God made you. And that's what he told you, you know?
Yeah. I think one thing to note, I've often heard people say like, well, I'm this or I'm that. God created me to do this or God created me to do that. And like, he might have had that purpose in mind when creating you, but like, it is, I believe, absolutely, I'm not a fan of making blanket statements, but this seems to be something that the Lord is constantly showing me for myself and other people, that it is always, 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 always going to start with you being a child. Like, if you skip past that, then you need to stop and back up, because you might be missing it. Like, it is always going to start with like you being created in his image for relationship with him, to sit at his feet, to sit on his lap, to whatever, and just be with him. Like, that is always going to be the starting place. And so if you've skipped past that, or haven't had like a deep emotional like revelation of that that's wrecked your life, like, I would back up and like really press in and say like, Lord, I want your heart for me in that.
Yeah. Like, the difference here is the difference between saying I'm a guitarist. So if you take away my guitar, I don't know what I am anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And saying I'm a child of God who plays guitar.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a child first.
So good.
I play guitar.
Yeah.
God made me to play guitar. My dad says he likes my guitar playing. It's what I am, you know? But it starts from being a child.
Mm-hmm.
And then who does this? Who does that? It's never, Cody, you're an evangelist.
Yeah.
It's like, Cody, you're a child who's good at evangelism or something. That's just a word. I don't even necessarily claim that as identity, but
for sure.
I do claim the child part, though.
Come on.
It's mine.
Well, and that was a big thing for me, and I feel like this is worth saying, is like, God never created us for anything else but to be with him.
Yeah.
And then everything flows out. And so I had this just kind of analogy that I felt like the Lord gave me, where it's like, I'm literally, like, my sole purpose, my purpose is not to be a missionary. My purpose is not to be a guitar player. My purpose is not to even win souls. Like, my purpose is to hang out with my dad, to be like a little child hanging out with my dad. Like, he does the things. And there's this whole aspect of like God going before us and fighting our battles. Like Deuteronomy, even Moses, who got the law, had this understanding of the father heart of God. And Deuteronomy, he says, the Lord wants to carry you like a father carries his child. And he talks a bunch about the Lord going before you and the Lord fighting the battle and the Lord giving you victory and all these things. And so there's this aspect of God actually being the one to do the things. And so I had this kind of picture that the Lord gave me of like, I'm just supposed to be a little kid going with my dad. Like I remember my physical dad, like, working on the car, right?
Yeah.
And I would go, and he'd be like, hey, will you get me this tool, or will you do that, or will you do this? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I felt like I was a mechanic. Like, I'm doing the things too. Like, I'm working on the car with my dad. I'm changing the oil. I'm learning how to do the things. But in reality, it wasn't even me. I was just there, probably a hindrance on some level, but like, he's putting up with me. And so it's the same with the Lord. Like we're probably, he could probably do it better, you know, but there's this aspect of him like wanting to like bring us along and work through us and in us and like partner with us and have us go with him. And it's like bring your kid to work day. And so this aspect of like, I'm going wherever the father is, wherever dad is going, and I'm going to be with dad, and I'm going to do what I see him doing. We see little kids mimic their parents all the time, and I specifically think of like, if dad is into trucks and stuff, his little boy is probably going to be into trucks and stuff. If dad's going to work and has a suitcase, like a briefcase, like the little kid's probably going to get a briefcase and pretend to go to work, you know? And so we see this in reality, and this is what it's supposed to be with the Father. And that's why Jesus says in John 5, he says, the Father loves his Son and shows his Son everything.
Yeah.
And the Son only does what he sees the Father doing. Like, this is what it's meant to be, you know? And so, I don't know. So, like, identity, like, literally has to start in this place.
Well, it's going on about an hour and a half again.
Yeah. We got a lot more on this part.
We tried our very darndest to get this. This is still just the first part. And we tried our very hardest to get it in one episode, but it's looking like it's going to be 2 episodes of the first part even.
Yeah.
Not to mention the second part.
It's going to be part 1, part 2.
Yep.
So, yeah, this episode is getting a little long. So, we'll probably chop her here and bust this first part into 2 parts, and then we'll have a third part that's talking specifically
at least
about
a third part.
American culture. Yeah, at least a third part. It's just so meaty, and we don't want to do it
we just
injustice.
want you to get all the good bits,
but we don't want to have a 5-hour long episode.
Basically, it's like when you make a lasagna and you got to scrape off all those burnt cheesy bits on the edges.
Yeah,
it's good stuff. Perfect analogy.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, so we'll probably go ahead and cut it here, and yeah, so what's happening around the base, Cody? What is going on? It's new at YWAM Nash.
Well, let's see. So at the time of this recording, there's about 40 students here at the base doing something called Thunder Camp.
Thunder Camp.
It's a like creative worship camp thing. Could you describe it better than that, or does that work?
I think that works. I mean, that's about the level that Michael Mack explained it on, but
yeah.
Basically, there's a ministry called The Foundry and Harvest Sound.
I think Harvest Sound is the ministry and Foundry is the church.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, yeah, I think that's right. So the ministry is Harvest Sound. And they run like a week-long camp, and kids come. And do you know what age group they are? They look like older middle school, high school. I can't tell. They look young to me.
They're like youth group age.
Yeah. So, yeah.
It's pretty relative.
Yeah. So some kids come, and they like just press into Jesus and some different like creative arts, worship expression stuff.
Yeah.
And it seems really cool, and from what I heard, is super impactful.
It's awesome.
So if you're interested in that, I would definitely check them out. They come out to the base for the week and stay here, and usually do some ministry within that as well. And it's pretty cool.
If you're not especially expressive or charismatic, it might be a little weird for you, but
true.
But in a good way.
Yes, we still recommend it.
Come be challenged. It's like DTS, actually.
Yeah. So, and it seems really awesome. And I heard some of the testimonies from some of the campers last year, and they were like getting wrecked with the Lord. And so,
oh man,
it seems like it's.
I was moving
super
in
good.
Last year when camp was happening.
Yeah. Cody's
I was
been here
like,
a whole
wow,
year.
there's kids everywhere. I don't know what's going on, but I need to go unpack.
Yeah.
And then this year, it's like, wow, there's kids everywhere.
Yeah.
Time to go to the office. I don't know.
Yeah, we were a little more involved, Alina and I, last year, but this year we're busy with doing the podcast stuff and all that. So
they gave me a ding dong and a LaCroix too.
Yeah, they actually offered me one. They offered me one a little bit ago.
Wow.
But it's not soda, so I declined.
Right on. So there's that happening. We mostly finished the trail to the river.
Oh, yeah.
I personally carved some stairs out of a boulder. And
I didn't think it could be done.
And some mud stairs out of an embankment that are probably going to wash away by the end of the year, but it's fine.
See, Cody, why would you ever play video games? You can do Minecraft in real life.
Yeah, it's only miserable and makes you in pain and agony for the next week.
Perfect.
Chopping stairs. It does not take 3 seconds to chop out a square meter of dirt, just so you know. It doesn't
man.
matter what kind of shovel you have. Not to say that I actually had a diamond shovel, so
Oh man.
there's that. And
as always, we're running our discipleship training school this fall. Got
and
students
spring.
and spring. So the fall one starts
September 20th. Yep.
The spring one starts March 28th. And so what that is a 5 to 6 month training school where you come here to the base, you live in community for the first 3 months, that is. And we bring in speakers every single week, and they teach on different topics. And you really just press into the Lord.
You learn about all the things we talk about and more.
Yeah. And so it's super great, super in-depth. It's just a season of coming away.
Well, and then the last 2 months are like going overseas and putting everything you learn into practice, reaching people for Jesus.
Yeah, so the whole thing is just a season of coming away and just pressing into the Lord and what his heart is. You'll get taught different aspects, and then
You got to come ready, though.
go experience it. But yeah, you got to be ready
Showing
to press
up
in.
does not mean any change will happen.
Precisely.
We would like to hope so, but you have to be ready. You got to want it. You got to come with an open heart and an open mind and be like, Lord, I'm here. I will do anything you want me to do.
Come on.
And it'll be the most amazing and crazy time of your entire life.
Got to be ready to deny yourself, take up a cross, follow him.
Exactly.
Ask, seek, knock.
Yeah. It's your choice. So you got to come ready for growth if you want growth.
So we're calling the hungry ones.
We're
Bring it
calling
on.
Hello. YWAM Nashville calling. You hungry? Because we've got some food.
Oh, man. So I think that might be it. I can't think of anything else.
Pretty much.
This has been episode 11.
What about fun questions?
Oh,
Can't break tradition.
it's true.
All right. Let me think. I don't have my notes with me today, but I said but. No, I'm just kidding. No. But if you could put anything in a time capsule, what would you put in it?
I'd probably write a note. I actually did a time capsule with my friends once, and it occurred to me that I put some lame junk in there that I'm not even going to care about now.
Did you put some of those trucker cards in there?
I might have.
I remember you saying that.
I put a guitar pick that this band I really liked at the time had signed, and now I'm kind of just sad that I wasted a guitar pick in a box on the ground. But yeah, so. But I thought it would be way more interesting if I wrote my future self a note or something.
Uh-huh.
It was this is where I'm at, this is what I'm thinking, this is what's important to me, And just as more of a now I could look at it as a token of where I came from, and I'd be like, oh man, what an idiot,
Yeah.
Punch my 16-year-old self in the face.
Do you remember everything you wrote on it?
Well, I didn't do it.
Oh, okay.
So, but I'm thinking I would now, looking forward.
Gotcha.
To my I could do it and be my 32-year-old self or something.
32-year-old Michael.
What about you, Cody?
Well, let's see. I'd probably put
Some of your long hair.
some of my long hair. No, that's kind of creepy.
Yeah, but there was
I
a
don't know
day.
what I'd put in there.
There was a day.
Maybe one of my favorite mugs.
Ooh.
A drawing.
Do you like drawings?
A CD, some worship music CDs. So maybe just some of my favorite CDs in general.
Yeah.
In general, they're mostly Christian bands, anyways.
You can come back and you can be you can either be oh, I remember this, or
Yeah.
oh gosh.
Yeah, I know. I feel that way about some of my early music, but yeah, and I probably write a note to whoever finds it, God is calling you deeper. And then
Just put a Bible in there.
yeah, just yeah, that too.
This
just
was meant for you.
Write down all my theology from right now,
Yeah.
and then
Oh, that'd be good.
it would, because then if I dug it up in the future, I could be wow, I was wrong about this and this and this. Or it would be even funnier if, like, after the end of the world, it's still there and God's like, hey, Cody, look what I found.
Yeah.
You want to talk about this? And I'm like, oh, man, yeah, let's go. But, yeah. Or somebody else finds it and they're like, oh, look, Cody's theology. It'd probably be worse. I'd be like, oh, God. But
You'd be like, I was wrong about all of that.
yeah. But, yeah, I don't know. It might be a good starting point for him.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, if I found a box with, like, a holy book and then some guy's explanation of it, I don't know. Well, yeah, I would probably think that was about as good as the thing itself, because as far as I'm concerned, I found them both in the same spot, and they were buried by the same person. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't do that, unless it was specifically for me. Basically, I haven't thought about this super hard.
Yeah. No
I
worries.
don't like have a lot of things that I would want to find years later. I might, like, if I could, I would bury a game system and then some of my favorite games as a kid, and like 80 years old be like, oh yes, I remember this game.
You're like, is that a PlayStation 2? Huh?
The Xbox 360.
Yeah.
I haven't played that in 80 years.
I'm starting to feel that way with like the Dreamcast and stuff now.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is old. I was a wee lad when that came out.
Yep. I don't know.
We can cut out that part.
Basically, I don't really value anything enough that I would bury it in the ground for
Yeah.
someone else. It would be a bunch of random stuff that I don't really care that much about, essentially. Maybe some incense, some bottle caps, a vacuum, a freeze-dried donut, maybe.
Oh, yes. Like,
Krispy
you're
Kreme.
welcome. In case
Yeah.
the world ends or some kind of crazy
This
apocalyptic
may be
thing.
disgusting, but it's the last donut you're ever going to taste.
Maybe vacuum, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Freeze-dried.
Yeah.
Well, good talk.
Yep.
Just,
So, thanks for being with us in episode 11. And
yeah.
we'll see you in episode 12, I guess.
Yep. We got lots more interesting things to talk about.
True that.
Kingdom of Heaven, it turns out, is a pretty interesting place.
Yeah.
You wanna
true
be there.
that. You do.
Be there or be square.
And the invitation is open.
It is always
Surrender.
open. That is part of the culture. Inclusivity.
Hey, but we'll get to that.
Come and get it.
Peace and love.
Peace and love. And